feel that the identity thing, it's when it comes to the colored box, I feel that it's an administrative term that is used to separate us as Africans or as black people. Even though the box called black also needs to be interrogated, I believe, as an identity.
Own personal work as a visual artist, it kind of goes in different layers. I think sometimes I create from a space of who I want to be, and other times I create from a space of where I'm at in that moment.
Hi everyone, welcome to Izulami. My name is Natasha.
And my name is Kumo, and we are Izulami.
Awesome. Today we are joined by two young professionals, and in our segment we just want to focus in on young people doing great things in their respective fields. We are joined by Earl and as well as Neil. Thank you guys for joining us.
Thanks so much.
Thank you for having us.
So I think maybe we should start off the conversation with my favorite question. So please introduce yourself firstly, and what do you do? What are you passionate about, and what is your body of work?
Sure.
I know. I need to get over my excitement about that question.
Yeah, it's a big question.
Yeah, it is. So,
Would you like to go first?
I'll go for it. Okay, so I'm Earl Abrams. I'm originally, I'm going to start off with where I'm from.
Definitely.
Okay, cool. Earl Abrams. I'm originally from Bonteheuwel, Cape Town, on the Cape Flats. When I think about my journey into being me, I think it starts with my grandfather, my grandmother, and my mom. They really kind of paved the way for me to see the world in a very different way. And I think more from a way of being of service and not always just being served. So that kind of got me into this world of community development and youth development. So I started my life within that framework, if I could put it in that way. And I spent about 10 years of my life in the NGO sector, running youth development programs and doing a lot of personal development training as a freelancer as well. And my body of work, is that the next question? Wow. Jeebus. Sure. I think my life's work, or what I'm working towards, is kind of focused surrounding identity at the moment, and trying to unpack what a group identity means. How does an individual identity fit within that group identity, and not allowing those identities to have any conflict, but it being something that we all are part of. So identity is quite a big thing close to my heart, and maybe I'll unpack it a bit later, but all these boxes that we kind of fit into, and within the contextual box of South Africa, I would be seen as colored, but it's not a box that I subscribe to, or that I agree with, or that I feel not anything towards, but I just don't agree with that box. And if there are follow-up questions, I can get into that. I know that that's not specifically the angle of the conversation, but I just thought I'll leave it right there. Was there another question involved in any of the...
I know, it's a great start.
Yourself now?
Okay, so I have been born and raised in Joburg. Moved quite a bit around Joburg, from the East Rand to the north, and now in the south in Alberton. I was raised as well with a very big kind of matriarchal family system. My grandmothers play a really big role in my life. All my mothers, we can break it down, but all of my mothers have been a big part of who I am. And when it comes to my work, I've always been, I guess, similar to Earl in that I start with myself and I do the inner work to have an understanding of the greater context. So I'm really interested in women and female narratives, and how each of us as individuals have these interlinking, connected stories. I'm really passionate about mental health and being aware of your mental health and your mental well-being, so I explore that in my work. I'm a designer. I'm an interior designer by profession and by studying. So I'm very structurally, like the way that I think is very structural, even when it comes to my art. So yeah, that's me.
Interesting, guys.
You guys.
Sure. There's so much to unpack, like
Yeah.
the different passions, right? But yeah, so let's start with. I just want to start with the topic of identity, right? Because you explore that in your work. So firstly, I think just tell us what the work actually is, and then why this identity avenue, as well as why you're saying you don't subscribe to being identified as colored.
Okay. So I think the identity work started, studying theology with a major in community development and working in the development sector in different communities, one experiencing different spaces and different communities. I think that was the one thing. And then also just being involved in various urban culture movements that really gave me the opportunity to explore life and see different people from a different perspective. And then I left the development sector. I chose to freelance as a photographer, but I was always shooting throughout my time of working, so that was always my life. But when I ventured into freelancing, I chose to take up a residency with a gallery in Cape Town. It's no longer present. They called Amplify Studios. So I spent most of I did the residency for it was a 3-month residency, and the body of work that I focused on was focused on identity, and specifically focusing on trying to unpack what this term colored means. And for me, the body of work is titled Colored In, which looks at the Group Leaders Act, the impact of the Group Leaders Act on so-called colored identity. And I believe that we're all colored into boxes, you know, these boxes that were given to us, and we were not asked, hey, who are you? What are you? What do you choose to be? And for me, it was just the exploration of self and communities that looked like my community, and people that looked like me and also didn't look like me, but found themselves in proximity to this box that I grappled with. And I feel that the identity thing, it's when it comes to the colored box, I feel that it's an administrative term that is used to separate us as Africans or as black people. Even though the box called black also needs to be interrogated, I believe, as an identity. And how do we create a uniformed identity that we say that, cool, this is who we are? So at the moment, I'm just asking a lot of questions. I can't impose my views on someone else. So the chapter happened in Cape Town, and Cape Town has its own politics and its own history, which is very different to what Joburg. And my experience of Joburg right now, in terms of unpacking that identity, it's a lot more dynamic, and it's a lot more, it's very different, you know. So at the moment, I'm looking at Westbury as a space to ask those questions. Because Westbury itself was the first black township that was close to the city where black people could live, you know. And with the passing of the Group Leaders Act, they said, okay, no, we have to, black people, we will be separated, colored people, we will be separated. But like, how do you tell the difference in such a dynamic space, in such a fluid space? Like, how do you say who's black and who's colored? What was the process, the protocol to kind of separate those people? So I think that I'm in this space where I'm just asking a lot of questions. I don't have any answers. I'm not sure if that answers the question.
No, for sure. And I think, you know, there's so much to be discovered, right? Sometimes we think that we have it figured out ourselves, and we get triggered by certain things, you know, just to your topic of mental health and the things that you are passionate about, and then we go on this journey. So it's a never-ending journey, and I think it's beautiful, right? And I think what you're going through, and you know, the journey is going to highlight so many things, not only just for yourself, and I think the people that are also vested in your work. So I think that's pretty cool.
And now I think I really like when you said you start with yourself. So I think that also ties into a lot of into you know, exploring identity. So does your work reflect a lot of that? Do you start even in projects where you are kind of conditioned to fulfill certain requirements in interior designing? Does it firstly reflect to you first in your identity, and do you think that's important that your work does that?
I think it is important because when it comes to authenticity, that's the best way I know how to be honest and how to be authentic, is to start with my own narrative, my own journey. So even when it comes to picking projects, I always try to gravitate towards projects that I see myself in, because it makes the design process that much more swift for me, because it's something I actually resonate with. So when it comes to starting with me just in my own personal work as a visual artist, it kind of goes in different layers. I think sometimes I create from a space of who I want to be, and other times I create from a space of where I'm at in that moment. So I have a body of work coming out now called A Note of Defense, and it's about body dysmorphia and dealing with your mental health in relation to like your greater context, and how we live in our bodies as our homes, but how that's such a mental minefield for a lot of us, you know. So that's a piece of work that's starting from my own inner struggles, and then I have another series of work called the Goddess series, which is about a manifestation of who I want to be. You know, so I think I constantly live in those two different places.
It's not as linear,
Yes,
right,
yes.
as we would assume it to be. It's an
Yeah.
actual process
Yeah.
of going back and forth,
Yeah.
just trying to create. So I think, you know, just talking about art and the work that you guys do, you know, being creative in the spaces, how does it start, and like how does someone actually get into that field? And I want us to talk about like the African landscape of the work that you guys do, because I think, you know, when we watch a lot of content, it's always from a westernized perspective, right? The movies, people wanting to get into art schools or whatever it is, but just from an African perspective, how is that journey? And, you know, is it as celebrated as we see it in the Western world?
Should I start? Is it as celebrated? I would say short answer, no. I think when it comes to being African, I think the trauma, just as a continent at large, the trauma has really forced us to look within ourselves and to build from the ground up. You know, we don't have the privilege of being validated by the world at large. So it means you have to validate yourself, and all the individuals in every individual country is doing exactly the same thing. We're all building from the ground up. So I don't think that we're necessarily celebrated, but I also don't think that that needs to be our goal. I don't think that we need to seek that validation from a Western perspective, because our heritage doesn't align with those values and that history. What was the first part of the question? Because I started with the second.
So the first part was like, how do you start this journey, right? You know, how do you venture into the space itself holistically?
So you
Yeah.
wake up in the morning and you want to be a creative or an artist, but what do you do?
Where do you start?
What does it mean?
Yeah.
I think it starts like exactly like what Earl was saying before the interview even started. You start with what you have. You literally pick up what's around you and you start there. Like, as a child, I was always really curious, and I loved creating out of what was around me, you know. So, and just as African people and people of color in general, we really have a knack for understanding our environment and working from that place, you know. So I think when it comes to creating and waking up and deciding to be a creative, I definitely just started with what was in front of me, you know, from a very literal sense, like picking up newspapers and little bits and pieces and collaging and creating from there. And then as I got older, I started to seek avenues where I could express and where I could support myself, you know, financially as well. You start to seek out those avenues.
And for you, Earl, are the dynamics similar?
I think yes and no as well. I think that for me, it's like I've created room for myself with all these hats that I wear. So besides creating work as an artist, I'm a business owner. So I get to step away from that weighted cloak of being called an artist. And it's not something that I gravitate to lightly because it's a term that I don't think that I'm comfortable with yet. But I'm becoming more comfortable with it through me interrogating what I'm trying to create. Because, you know, when I step into these worlds as a photographer, there's times that I'm a documentary photographer, there's times that I'm a conceptual photographer, and I'm using these different forms of expression. I'm like, what am I? And I've kind of let go of these boxes and just saying, hey, I love to create. I'm a business owner, I'm this, and I'm being kind of fluid in terms of stepping into those spaces and not putting as much pressure on myself. And then with the second part of your question was like, are we celebrated? I think that the aesthetic is celebrated. Like there's an African aesthetic that exists, and you can see it online. Even the African aesthetic that exists even in the States, in terms of how they've kind of portrayed, or even how we've portrayed the African aesthetic in terms of the color, the look. And I feel that Africa is more than just the aesthetic that whoever's put on us, because there are gatekeepers that have said this is what sells and this is what we're going to promote. It's not necessarily us saying this is what we want to sell. So yeah,
It's interesting that you
So much
say
to
that,
say even around that.
because I
Yeah.
was looking at that. I don't want to mention names. Like the popular artist that Black Coffee is always posting his artwork, and it's beautiful. But I'm starting to see a trend. A lot of artists that are creating sort of like that same artwork of you know, this childlike portraits with color, and there's so many artists coming out and us creating this narrative that our art landscape looks like that, right? So it's interesting that you would say that, because it really is one person creates this narrative, and then it creates kind of this perception that that's what it looks like. So even going on that, I mean, social media is kind of just like it makes you feel as if something is when it isn't, right? I'm seeing a lot of people kind of getting into the interest of art and creativity, even for ourselves as observers. So do you think, from your perspective and creating the bodies of work that you create, that people are starting to, us as people of color specifically, are starting to be more receptive to your work? Do we appreciate it in a monetary basis? And do we understand it? Are we more curious about it? And does it matter if we are or not interested in creativity and in art? And does it matter? I asked so many questions.
Yeah, that's what I was like. It's late. I'm like, okay, what?
Let's just start with with the first one.
So what is the first one?
The first one was, are we showing an interest in art and creativity, right? And in all ways, and appreciation, monetary kind of. So am I hiring as my interior decorator and appreciating your work, right? And not seeing that as, even your illustrations, do people come and say, oh my gosh, I want these in my home, in my lounge, and when you're giving forth your pricing, they're like, this makes sense, you know? Because I know us.
Tricky.
How much?
I'll get back to you.
And I mean,
Is it that appreciation from your?
Do you know what? I think there's an appreciation. People definitely are, I think, big on vocally saying how they feel, and you know, if someone really loves your work, I do find that there are people that will kind of affirm what I'm doing, and you know, tell me that I really appreciate this, and you know, and especially the more I talk about mental health in my work, the more people are coming to me and saying like, oh, this is something I really resonate with, or you know, I went through a similar experience, or whatever the case is. So I think there is an appreciation. I mean, it doesn't necessarily translate to getting paid. I think there are a few people who are definitely like interested in collecting art, and you know, there's definitely a niche market, and I think that's sort of just how the industry works as well. It's very like niche, and there's a very small pocket of people. So it's not necessarily like financially reciprocated, which is obviously very stressful and disheartening in a lot of ways as well, you know, because it's telling of how people see art.
Yes.
It's telling of the importance or the value that they put on it. That there's this massive gap. There's like a few people that put so much value on it, and then basically everyone else is like, oh, but do I need this? And you know, I could just go on Superbalist and get something for $100 and put it on my wall. Like, you know, people aren't necessarily, they love the narrative on Instagram, but they don't want the narrative in their home because it's expensive.
Sure.
You know?
Interesting. Sorry, I just thought of something now. Remember, have you guys seen that picture that used to be in almost every black home? And when no one could find the artist, the picture of that, where the
Yes,
mother
the mother and child.
no one knows who the art, but we all grew up
Yeah.
with our grandmothers or
Yeah.
someone having that picture in their homes.
Yeah.
And that just shows you the power, because that ignites childhood memory, nostalgia, and people don't even see that. We don't even know who the artist is also.
Yeah. Which is problematic in and of itself.
Yeah, it is.
Sure. Do you mind repeating the question again?
The question was, is there an appreciation for the body of work that you guys are presenting to us?
From
And-
people of
yeah.
color.
And is it translating from one to the other?
Yeah, kind of yes and no. I think that there is an appreciation, and I think that it's one understanding your target audience, understand how to reach your target audience, because like the online world is controlled, so you're never going to reach everyone that you want to reach.
Yeah.
There's only a certain amount, there's a certain percentage that you're going to reach that only appreciates through just looking. And then the other appreciation that needs to appreciate with their money, that might come through you having to pay for ads, you know?
Yeah.
And then there's an offline audience that you need to engage with that doesn't want to exist within that realm.
Yeah.
Because honestly, social media is there to distract. I'm not sure if you've ever found yourself going online, even wanting to purchase a ticket for something, because this happened with me on Instagram. I'm wanting to purchase a ticket online because it's on the Instagram
Like the
page. And then I get distracted and I forget to purchase the ticket.
Oh yeah.
So, you know, like I think about how many people have gone through that with my work, with your work, with every other artist's work, that we sometimes
My business.
you know what I'm trying to say? Because like you have your business online, but like with your product, like there's markets, you know, that we need to engage with, like actual markets, going to like a, what do you call this, food and it's a food and whatever when they, you know, they sell them good things. But I think that there are markets that we're not exploring now because of the online space.
Yes.
So I think that I'm also just thinking from my perspective that I have not taken enough responsibility in terms of ensuring that my message is clear enough for the audience. Because like I'm like, cool, I can hold the audience and the people accountable to a certain degree once I've got everything clear on my side.
100%.
So there's that there's that relationship, that tug of war.
Yeah.
Sure.
That was a
Yeah.
drag.
No, absolutely, absolutely. But it's honest, right? So I think like from a social media point of view, I do think that there's a lot of power, right? It's just how you are actually engaging and you're, like you're saying, holding yourself accountable to make sure that your customer journey and your storyline is clear for the audience that you're trying to attract. But with that being said, though, I think, you know, it would be unfortunate if we didn't talk about what happened during the pandemic and, you know, how we are actually living now, you know, how we are engaging in different platforms. Previously would have been, you know, a lot of physical engagements, you go, you show your art, you know, you're going to people's homes, etc. But now that we've been in lockdown, how has that changed the way you guys are operating, the narrative you're telling, and just how you're showing up in your different spaces?
I definitely found myself becoming more of a content creator, which is not my strong suit, and it's not something I find fun necessarily, but I found that we were all spending so much time on our phones now, that exhibiting in the real world was becoming a non-factor. So the online space was where, if I have something to say, that's where I need to say it, you know. So it was quite difficult to switch my brain into like, okay, now I have to be really serious about like posting things and engaging with people. Like engaging on social media is honestly a job, like in and of itself. Like to really have, I find it so much easier to talk to people face to face. Like now if someone likes something or comments, I have to comment back, and there's like this calculation, like, okay, what am I gonna say? They said this, and then they sent a heart emoji, and then so do I send a heart emoji back, or do I?
Is it a different color heart
Should I
emoji?
do the orange heart? I don't know. Like it's all of this thinking that's going on, you know, up to the point where it is distracting. You forget about the actual topic, you know, like. Now it's just about this random conversation with someone I haven't seen in 5 years, but I'm like overanalyzing.
And you're actually seeking that engagement as well, right?
Yes.
Because then that means you're doing something right.
Yes.
And it almost validates. And I think that's like the downside of social media, but that's a different show altogether.
It is this very like contradictory space, because the engagement is obviously welcome because it means people are seeing you, like you're being seen in what you're doing. But it is also quite a generally superficial space. So when it comes to the things that we're used to in the real world, like a monetary exchange, those things become redundant, you know, like especially with COVID, people just, I mean, a lot of people saved money, which is incredible because we weren't like out in the streets, but the sorry. Okay, well, maybe not everyone did. But those real life exchanges do become very like null and void because it's just about what's happening online. So
And yourself?
I think like for me,
How have you had to pivot?
yeah, like COVID, like sure, created a shift in terms of work, like because my work is dependent on being out, working with clients and being with clients. But I poured all of that energy. I was completely frustrated when I heard the announcement that we're going to be on lockdown. I was losing my S word. You know, I was using my S. I'm not sure we're allowed to swear on the channel.
Be yourself.
I was losing my shit because I'm like, I wasn't coping. When I heard that announcement, I was not in a good space. But what I always tell myself, allow yourself to feel. You know, allow yourself to work through that, because that might give birth to something else or nothing, you know?
And that's also fine.
And that's also okay, but at least I'm being true to my feelings, and at least I'm being true to myself. And that space or that time gave birth to me creating a body of work, lockdown series. That did fairly well, because that gave me the money to sustain myself for a few months. That if I didn't get frustrated, allow myself to feel and not live in denial, I don't know if I would have been able to create that work. So I think that the sense of just being vulnerable with yourself, and I'm not sure how many people took it upon themselves to be vulnerable with themselves during lockdown. It's not an easy thing, because you always feel like you have to have everything together, but I didn't have anything together. All I knew, I set up a schedule. I'm gonna train in the morning, come back, try to sort out something, and then had my camera, went to the parking lot, went to go and shoot in the building, whatever I could. And that's what I did every single day. You know? So I think the aspect of routine played an important role in my life during the lockdown period.
That's such a beautiful narrative, actually. We laugh, but beautiful nonetheless.
We all laugh our shit.
You know what I'm trying to say? Like, I mean, some people came out gold, and I'm like, yes, honey. And that's also a beautiful thing. Like, lockdown meant so many different things to everyone, and that's okay. Not everybody needs to have a terrible time during a terrible time.
That's
true.
Our journeys are not the same.
You know,
100%.
All right, and I think maybe just to maybe end it off. Man, I see it.
What do you?
from your different perspectives, right? What's the end goal? Like, what would be the most desirable thing you want, kind of like your journey to symbolize? Like, when you have plateaued, right? Whatever that means for you, you have reached the space of fulfillment in your body of work and your emotions and in your life, just that moment of contentness, right? In this journey that you're going through, what would that look like? What would that mean? Yes.
Deep.
Yeah, that is deep.
Because you know what, I really appreciate, creators, because they're always so in tune, you know, with things. I mean, I would never ask.
Would you never ask what? A
Hey,
banker? What do you
What if the banker has life goals and things that they do, but it's just like,
Who is not in Julia? I feel attacked.
I mean, I should keep quiet.
I think for me, a big part of creating is connecting with people, you know, and sharing our stories. You know, we're all individuals with our own stories, and you know how to tell your story best. No one else can do that for you. So when we do that, when we're all doing that and committing to that, then there's so much compassion and kindness and empathy that's born from that. You know, like what matters, I think, you know, hatred and discrimination is born from a lack of knowledge and being confused. And so if we're all just saying our stories and we're looking each other in the eye and saying, this is who I am, this is where I come from, there's so much connection that happens, you know, like it humanizes us. And I think creativity and art and just telling stories really does that. It connects us. So I would hope that one day if I'm lucky enough to grow old and I have this body of work in front of me, that people see their stories in my story, and that we really found a connection and we empathize with each other.
Sure.
See?
Powerful.
Yes.
Oh, good thing.
Powerful.
You know, it's real when the snaps.
Oh yeah, I was about to say, are we snapping
Listen,
because of the
no.
show? Like, I don't want to.
No, that hit deep, you know?
Sure.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Yeah.
And I think, yeah.
Tell us.
You know, and just tagging into people being able to see themselves, I have a desire to create kind of localized archives that belong to the community, and kind of in partnership seeing how we create that archive and having museum spaces. To me, like every single community needs a museum that represents them. So if that would be my body of work, that's what I would want it to be. And then trying to figure out how we start to see how all these communities are actually connected. So there was a project that I had in mind because there's another township directly across from the one that I was brought up in called Langa. So Langa and Bontio are separated by just the road, but there's no interaction between the spaces. The only interaction many times is through drugs or through driving through in order to cut into another township, into another space. So it was like, the idea that I had is, how do we get young people to tell each other's stories? How do I see you and how do you see me? And then using that as a platform to bring people together. So yeah, passionate about the archive, and I'm passionate about the archive belonging to us, and not some, unfortunately, not some European that comes to a space, documents people, and then takes the body of work and then sells it internationally, and not a single cent gets given back to the community. That pisses me off. It's not a high way to end, but woo! Yeah.
It's true and it's honest.
Controlling the narrative.
That was beautiful.
Our space and everything. Lovely. I enjoyed this conversation.
Yeah,
Me too.
I think we should continue offline.
Yeah.
But thank you so much, guys, for coming on the show. I think this is such an incredible episode that we just had. Great conversation as well, and something different also for us. So thank you. Appreciate your presence. Guys, please, thank you so much for watching. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And just tell us your thoughts on everything that has been discussed, us controlling the narrative, what the creative space looks like for you, and how you are also contributing to it. Because there's power in us coming together at the end of the day.
Yeah,
So,
for sure.
100%.
thank you.
Sure.
Thank you
Thank
for watching.
you.
So much.
Bye.
Cheers.